the 401k really is, about 40 years old now? I think it's just hit its 40th birthday. Right. So now you're having the first wave of people. Welcome to the Live Greater View, a financial planning podcast produced by VLP Financial Advisors that discusses life, money, and perspective. We help clients live their best life at every stage through our VLP Live Greater partnership process. Thank you for tuning in. All right, great. Today on this episode, we're going to get into a topic that comes up a lot with clients. Usually as we go through the planning process, and that's that charitable giving aspect.
Yeah, charitable giving, that's something that deserves so much context. This is one of those things that you can definitely go down a rabbit hole on the internet, and we thought that it'd be good for us to spend some time today talking about scenarios that have come up over the years with clients and just give this the time that it deserves from a planning standpoint also.
Yeah, because I think the biggest thing is some clients don't understand all the options available. So we're going to touch on some of those today and really how the whole process kind of unfolds.
Yeah, and I think for our conversation, it makes sense to structure it. Well, really, how does this whole idea of charitable giving come to fruition? There's some preconceived notions of what that looks like, and in some cases that may make sense, in some cases it doesn't make sense. So we'll talk about common situations that we've seen with clients who actually are ready to cross that bridge, and then we'll get into more of the technicals of popular funds that we use in different structures, more of the piece of actually how you go about implementing charitable giving.
Great. Well, let's kick it off. So first off, one of the first ways charitable really comes about is people are givers. You know, it's ingrained. They've been charitable since they've started earning money, whether that's tithing to their certain organization or just their favorite charity, whether that's helping out the shelter or whatever. So that's one of the first we see.
Yeah, I would put that really in the first group. That's a no-brainer. And that's, like you said, somebody that says, hey, you know what, from the outset, this is something that I want to do. Something that's interesting there that I've seen over time is it isn't always age, based, as in there's a lot of younger clients nowadays where they really make good money. Their parents are involved in things that they really care about. And that goal of charitable giving is actually coming up a lot earlier in their career, sometimes in their 40s and 50s. So I would say that group is really the box that we check where we say, hey, is this a goal for you? And they say, that's me. And we obviously put that into their plan.
Yeah, so they are planning. They know that they're going to give every year. The dollar amount may vary, but they know that there's something that they're really excited about. They want to make sure that they get behind, and they're going to put dollars behind it.
Right.
Yeah.
And the second group, I think, is more clients that they have a lot in savings, and obviously this group is the group that we consider where they're not initially charitably inclined, but they slowly but surely come to realization that they have more than enough money for all of their needs. Their family's going to be taken care of, and all of their day-to-day expenses are covered by their portfolio, and now they're getting to the phase where they can actually start to really consider giving some of that money away.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is really kind of the fun part of the planning, right? You get to there, you've saved all this money, you've gotten to that point where you're taking income, you're retired. Most of the time in this scenario, you're retired. They know that everything, hey, I'm going to be good. I'm going to be so good. The kids are going to be good. I don't want the kids to be that good. Or whoever they're leaving that legacy to, they've decided that maybe this is more money than we ever anticipated having. And now there was these things that we've cared about along the way that we really want to make maybe a bigger impact or be involved in.
Yeah, and with this group, the thing that I think is so important to consider where you kind of see the light bulb go off for clients is the idea of distribution rates. So what we'll do over time, and I know that we're going to talk about some of the software, but when we're looking at a back of the napkin, really just directional, based approach to say, well, are you able to actually give more money away? We get to a point where you're actually taking less money out of the portfolio than what we're earning in compound interest over time. So let's say the portfolio analyzes 7% per year, you're only spending 4 to 5%. We know that we have that sort of delta there that we can really start to give money away. And once we go through that whole exercise with clients and we show, hey, here's where you are today, here's where you'll be 5 or 10 years from now and beyond, that tends to be where it becomes a lot more clear where they say, okay, I'm good. Now I can really start to consider giving money away.
Yeah, and it's really an interesting time because then they start to think about, you really get to understand what they're passionate about or what they've always considered they might want to be doing or giving away, and then it kind of gets a little fun,
Yeah.
right? They have this opportunity to say, instead of giving that $100 check to, this organization or that organization, I can give something with a few more zeros.
Oh yeah, and what is also very helpful in that exercise, outside of the distribution rate part, is also when we project what the future values are for what they'll actually be able to give away, and then what that actually means today. So if we, show a client, hey, at the end of your plan, you're going to have X dollars amount left over, unless we start giving some of this money away. What we do is take that number and then back it into what that actually is in today's dollars to make that a lot more relatable, and that tends to be, a big inflection point for them also.
Yeah, that's a great lead in. Let's start talking about our software and how we really do that. So it all starts with our financial planning software. And really, this is the time where we have clients fill out those books and where are they now, where they want to go, and really start to lay out what's important to them, either as they're approaching retirement or as they're entering this retirement phase. And then really put all that into the software and start going through, okay, as you kind of alluded to, what does this look like? What are the potential rates of return, which we can put in, what if we don't do as well? What if you perform below the market? What does that mean as far as your retirement and all the goals you've listed? And then we can also really kind of get very granular and say, well, what if we actually have that as a goal? What if this is a goal that we want to fund annually, every 5 years? We can kind of go through that and run through those numbers.
Sure. And the way that we organize that within our software, and the software is Money Guide Pro, is we'll really start with a clean slate and say, okay, we'll have your needs, furthest, on the hierarchy here. Those are the absolute non-negotiables.
Like being able to live and eat and
all the
clothing, the important things.
All the normal stuff that you're going to need through retirement. Second, we'll have wants. These are things that would be niceties above and beyond your everyday needs, and those we would say are middle of the road priorities. And then finally, we'll have wishes. These are things that would be great. They're not top of mind, but we like to account for them, if they come up during our conversations. And at some place on that spectrum, we'll place charitable giving for clients that are charitably inclined. And then what you're really getting at there at the end is there's no rule book or perfect way to go about giving money away. It looks different for everybody.
Every client.
Yeah.
Yep.
Some clients give away money every single year. Some clients have lump sum distributions. There's no right or wrong way, like a lot of things in our business, to do something. It's just more so that's where the value is in the conversation and trying to figure out what makes the most sense for that client.
Yeah, it really goes back to that individual planning because, as you alluded, not everybody's the same. We don't all have the same retirement number. We don't, I love when you hear, oh, how much money do I need to retire? And well, that depends on all those goals you have listed. So again, it really comes into that individual one-on-one conversation that you're having with the family or the client to say, what is important and how do these things rank when it comes to your big picture?
Sure. And as it relates to charitable giving, I do think that is really one of the bigger decisions that clients that are charitably inclined need to make is this going to be an ongoing gift or a series of gifts, or is this going to be a bigger one-off gift? And that's obviously where within our planning software, we can have different scenarios. Scenario one, where you give money on an ongoing basis, and then other scenarios where we model, one-off approaches. So
that's a great point because you have some clients who really their thought process is when they are going to give, it's going to be an impact gift, right? And if it's smaller in certain years, they still may do it, but they want to have certain years where it is, hey, I'm going to start this, I'm going to fund to this scholarship program or however, whatever's important to them.
Right. And so we talked about really, the first two groups that we consider charitably inclined. One, they're charitably inclined from the get-go. Two is that client who accumulates enough money over time to where it becomes more of a priority. The third group that is impacted the most, I'd say for some of the techniques that we're going to talk about, is groups of clients that have low basis stock or low basis investment. These are clients that have held certain investments, whether it be mutual funds or individual stocks that have done extraordinarily well over time. And then they get to a point where they are really between a rock and a hard place because they have enough assets, but they really can't have a significant liquidity event for those holdings without paying taxes.
Right. And that's where people get held up, right? It's the tax It's the tax tail, wagging the whole dog. And they don't want to necessarily be in that scenario. They say, yes, I can still continue to hold this, or I can give it to the heirs or pass it on. But this gives them a unique chance to do something where they could give away some money, see the benefits of it now, build something charitable, or we'll talk about it. There's some different techniques they can utilize.
Yeah, and this is one, again, like we said from the get-go, it's not necessarily based on stage. We've had a lot of younger clients who were either compensated through company stock or in some sort of capacity that's the way that they were paid, and then that stock has done well over time, and all of a sudden we're able to present tools that they didn't know were available to them.
Especially technology companies come to mind. I mean, that has been of the most recent where you're seeing some young people get some pretty significant wealth in a quick matter of time.
Yep. Yeah. Awesome. Well, now that we've talked about those three segments, and again, there's many ways that charitable giving can come up, but those are the three that are most common to us. Why don't we spend some time talking about the actual execution of that and what that looks like?
Yeah, so let's start with, I guess, one of the easiest and one of the most common we see is the QCD, right? And part of that, and the reason it's becoming more common is, we've talked about this in the past, is the 401k really is, about 40 years old now? I think it's just hit its 40th birthday. Right. So now you're having the first wave of people really retiring in the last couple of years. This has been their 100% way they've been saving for retirement. It's not a pension, and they're retiring with some very sizable balances. And it's not uncommon for us to see a client with a requirement of distribution, the amount they have to take out, be over $100,000, be in six figures. And in some cases, even larger than that. And when you look at their whole picture, you're going, geez, they've got this large IRA or 401k. Maybe they don't have any children. There's some issues. Maybe they're not married. Now we've got other things we got to think about. Or they are, and again, they fall in this, hey, we have enough money. Now what's this opportunity? I don't need all this money, but my tax bill is now going to go up. I'm going to go from the 12% bracket to the 30 pretty quickly. So let's talk a bit about what the QCD is, Chris, and how we can handle that.
So qualified charitable distribution, or QCDs, those are something that we always, make sure that we have on our radar when dealing with clients that, have significant retirement accounts. And again, this focuses solely on retirement accounts. And when we have clients that say, I am charitably inclined, I don't need the income, or we've also had situations where they're actually giving before they reach the required minimum distribution age, then we hit 70 and a half, which is one of the rules that we'll talk about. And we say, hey, it makes sense to do this from your IRA, not from some of the other assets that we were giving from before. So this is a very nice tool where you can meet that RMD requirement from your IRA. The income is not taxable, and then not only does it help you in that year, but it also reduces future required minimum distribution. So it helps out your taxes now and helps out your taxes in the future.
Yeah, and then I think the big thing, so you talked about a few things. Let's kind of clarify how the QCD roles are. Mm-hmm. One, you have to be 70 and a half. Ironically, it's not the same age of when your required minimum distributions have to start. And right. This year, it's in the year of 2024, it's 73. But the QCD age did not change. So you could start giving away before you have to take required minimum distributions. So that's one. Two, again, as you've alluded, it is inside a qualified account. So it's going to be, really it's an IRA. 401ks aren't set up for QCDs. Most, you're not going to have plan sponsors able to really be able to do this.
Sure.
Three, got to make the payment directly to the charity or the organization.
So important. Yep.
Yeah.
So the payment has to go directly from the IRA to the charity. If it changes hands, if the check is made out to the individual, all bets are off. So those are
IRS says, please send us a check.
Here's a nice surprise, and that's obviously one of the logistics that we have to get right. And then the only other point to mention there is the limit is $100,000 each year. So it's a very high limit, but nonetheless, that is one of the rules there. So again, has to be from an IRA directly to a charity. You have to be 70 and a half to be able to take advantage of this. And then the limit is $100,000 annually.
Yeah, and one other thing I would talk about when we talk about QCDs is not only does it the way it works on the tax form, right? It comes out before the line. So this is how your taxable income. And why is this important? Especially if you're on Medicare. So if you have a large requirement of distribution, but you take this money and you pay it out to the QCD, this could also not only lower your tax bill now, lower future tax years, but also may reduce your Medicare premium Part B.
Big trickle down effect. Got it. And what do you see logistics wise for clients that have QCDs? Do they give at any specific point during the year, or what does that look like?
It's kind of all over the place. We have some clients, in our office, in our company, we can actually give a checkbook to a client on an IRA. It creates some concerns and issues because we try to encourage clients, make these meaningful checks, not $50 checks to somebody else. So that's one thing to think about. But then we have clients who, at the beginning of January, they're reaching out to us going, hey, I'm going to give this to this organization. Here's my usual organization. Please send the form for me to sign. So some are repeatable. We know exactly when they're going to do it right after January. Some have that checkbook capacity where they can write checks throughout the year. In some cases, they're like, what is my requirement of distribution this year? And they're going to write it for the full. But with that becomes some caveats, right? One is we tell clients they really got to have all those checks written by November 1st because it has to clear. The check has to clear in the calendar year. And the issue is you get a lot of these charities, lo and behold, get checks in November and December, right? Everybody's looking at their tax return, writing, and they often don't deposit all the checks until sometimes January. So we encourage clients, if you're going to do checks that you're going to actually write and mail, do that in the earlier half of the year. And it's actually good for the charities because a lot of charities don't get that money until the end of the year. So this helps with their cash flow.
Got it. Yeah, I would say I see the same thing. I have a group of clients that the first of the year rolls around, we just rinse and repeat it a lot of the times what we did in the prior year. We obviously track all of those charities for them, and we save all the information just to make that a very easy process. And then I also have had some clients who are going through a specific giving cycle for their church or organizations that they care about. That it's been more of a one-off. So again, no right or wrong way to do it, but I thought it'd just be helpful to share, some of the common things that we see.
And that's a good point. A lot of organizations, not only just churches, will have a building fund. So they're rebuilding, they're expanding, and they'll do a separate charitable event for that. And we have clients that a lot of times will see bigger chunks go out because they're going to do that at that time.
Yeah. Awesome. So again, if you have an IRA, if you're over 70.5, this is something, qualified charitable distributions or QCDs that you definitely need to keep on your radar. Let's progress into the second.
One thing I want to the 100,000 is per person. So if you have two spouses, right, that have large 401ks, IRAs, that's something to keep in mind.
Okay, that's great to know. $200,000. Yeah, that's definitely obviously a number.
Yep.
Perfect. So that takes care of the IRA piece. Let's progress into the non-retirement vehicle that we use, the donor advised fund, or DAF as the acronym.
Yeah, so a little bit different. This is newer. So instead of doing the every year you're going to contribute whatever you've set aside in the goal planning, maybe you have some event where, again, you had stock options that were granted. Maybe someone gave you low basis stock. So if a parent gives you stock, the basis follows it. It doesn't step up whenever you get it the day of. And now it's really progressed, and you have a scenario where you're going, well, I don't need all this money. I want to do something. Or in the case where maybe it's a year where you're getting a lot of these stock options because the company got sold, yet everything has to be realized at that point, and now you're maybe got $1 million scenario coming your way. The donor advised fund is great because you can now fund it, take the whole tax deduction in 1 year. So let's say you decide you're going to put $200,000 in because you have this liquidity event that's going to give you way more than you need, and you want to manage the tax bill. So you can put $200,000 in that donor advised fund. And the nice thing about the donor advised fund is from there, you can decide when to give the money to the charities. So it's basically like pre-funding your charitable donation, saying, hey, I give $10,000 a year, but I have this liquidity event that's happening, and I'm going to move $200,000, and that's essentially 20 years of giving. that can be invested and grow.
Sure. And that's a really important distinction. So the deduction under that scenario that you just laid out, that takes place in year one, and then the giving can actually take place in that same year or many years in the future. So that's a very important difference between the donor advised fund versus the QCD like we were talking about.
Yeah. Or just regular giving, right? If you are just doing regular giving, it's only that year. So this is a way to really move the needle in a year that you may have a big change in income, and that you want to offset it and also fulfill or set aside that money for that charitable giving.
And the administration of something like this, I found, has been surprisingly simple. When you hear donor advised fund and it's a separate vehicle, automatically you start to think of complexities and paperwork and things like that. It's very easy to facilitate. Clients that have donor advised funds essentially have an online portal where they save all of the organizations that they like to give money to, and then simply from year to year, they'll go in, click that organization, and the check's out the door. So from a administration standpoint, it's been very simple to use.
Yeah, and setting it up also similar. It's just like setting up an online banking, checking, savings account. A little bit different in that you do, especially if it's a low basis stock, the moving the money that in has to be handled, the transfer agent. There's a few more steps versus you're just linking up some cash that you're sending over. But nonetheless, there are some very good players, big names in that space. And as you alluded to, pretty much any company that's a 501c is available for giving.
Yeah. And with this tool, it's interesting also in the fact that when you move whatever investment you're going to use to fund this vehicle, obviously a lot of times there's a big gain on that investment. The fund itself then sells that investment. The proceeds can then be reinvested into something that's similar to a 401k investment menu.
Yep.
So in a lot of instances, we'll have conversations with clients of, okay, we know from a tax standpoint this makes sense to do in this year, and we have all of that buttoned up. But then the conversation shifts to, well, what's giving going to look like downstream is what we refer to it. In some instances, it's going to happen over a shorter time period, so the investments make sense to be more aligned with that time period and be somewhat more conservative. In other instances, they say, hey, you know what, this could go on for a long time, and then we want to be more aggressive with their investments.
Yep.
So we've actually had scenarios where we'll contribute to a donor advised fund for one amount, invested in something aggressively, the market continues to do well, and then the client actually ends up giving away more money than what they initially contributed, which is great.
Yeah, which is a win-win. They get to be charitable to the extent they want. We get to lower the tax bill in the year that there was this event or tax scenario that they get to avoid, and they get eventually, especially if it's a long term, their ability to give away more money.
Great. And something else with donor advised funds that makes them unique is we talked about the commonality of giving low basis stock in a lot of instances. Donor advised funds can actually accept other investment vehicles, private placements, real estate, even collectibles. So it's something that tends to have a little bit more flexibility than a lot of other vehicles out there.
Yeah, very good point. Yeah, so something that if you're in that scenario and you're looking at an event where you're going to have a big income year and you're looking to offset, this is definitely something to consider.
Yep. Great. And we talked about, those two main things, and then let's talk about foundations. I know that you've done, a lot of work for clients with foundations and had, some stories that I thought would be good to talk through.
So this is when you've come to the realization you have way too much money, and in some cases not way too much, but it's a point where maybe you don't have any heirs. There's not a legacy as far as the family that you need to leave. In some cases, you've already covered the legacy of the family, so it can be kind of that scenario, and you want to set up something that's going to go on after you, right? There's going to be a board. There's going to be money set aside. It's going to be something you're passionate about. You could think about some of the big players like Bill Gates, Warren Buffett. Sure. Of course, this can happen on a much lower scale also. I've had clients set up where they're passionate about education in a certain region or area, and they wanted to focus on low income families being able to go to higher education and scholarships and various communities and colleges they wanted to support. That's been a couple of the areas that I've seen them set up for that. Others been humanitarian things that they're really passionate about, whether that's animals or something that again aligns with their interest and goals. So the foundation is also the way, there's a little bit more work. There's a lot more work. The donor advised, a little bit work to get the money in there, simple to get out, QCD, some paperwork. Foundation, there's a lot more involved. You've got to have documents, you got to have a board, there's got to be meetings. But it does allow, certainly during their lifetime, for them to build something up, to see and donate and give to the areas that are of importance to them and really make a meaningful impact, and then have something that could be a legacy that goes on after them.
And are there, with QCDs and donor advised funds, there's obviously, the handful of players there that do a lot of that legwork. Are there similar companies on the foundation front, or is that a lot more work on the client level to organize a lot of that amongst their friends and the board members?
Great question. There are a few companies that certainly will help set up and manage a foundation. Foundation Source is one that actually comes to mind. A lot of attorneys will specialize in this because you do need the proper documents. You do have to have guidelines, byline, all these things you're going to need. It's like running a small company with no employees.
Yeah.
Really.
Got it.
I mean, in some cases, a foundation can have paid positions. It just depends on what level of where you are as far as the foundation and the setup. But it is going to be a lot more in-depth work. This is like setting up a small company that's gonna run for a while. So we covered foundations. Again, just touched on the surface on that one. That one's a little bit more in depth. We don't see a lot of that with clients. Right. So let's go back. We talked about QCDs on the charitable giving side. We talked about donor advised and the foundation. And we ran through a little bit of a scenario where we saw it on the foundation side, but let's talk about where we've used QCDs with the client and where we've had a lot of success on the donor advised.
Sure. So just to share common scenarios that I've dealt with, I have a handful of clients where January 1st comes around each year. We have the names of the charities that they like to give to out of their IRAs and use the QCDs. We'll give to churches and other organizations. So I probably have between 5 to 10 clients that are in that basket where we tee the paperwork up for them, and that's done, say by the end of January. I've also had a few, like I had talked about before, where their church or other organizations that they care about are starting capital campaigns. And in years before they were 70.5, they had given to those campaigns from other cash flow or other income that they have. And now that they're hitting 70.5, we looked at their taxes and their full scenario and said, well, it makes sense to do that from the IRAs. So that's, the experience that I've had with that. On the donor advised fund front, I've had clients that were fortunate to get involved in technology companies at a very early stage. They've had liquidity events since then, and they've essentially been stuck with stock that they really can't do a lot with because they're going to get hit from a capital gains perspective. So we talked about donor advised funds, and that made sense for them to really try to lessen their taxes in specific years on the technology stock front, and then on the government contracting stock front also. So I know, just given our area, we have a lot of clients with government contractor stock. That's been an area that's we've used donor advised funds for also.
Yeah, and I would just add a couple of scenarios. QCD, same kind of scenario that you've mentioned, but one that I've started to see, perfect storm is you have two, husband and wife both turning 70.5, and they've got these large accounts. Again, we've talked about they've been charitable in the past, but now they're looking at their tax bill, and we're going, hey, this, if we don't do anything, when you turn 73 and you have to take these RMDs, you're going to go from the 12% bracket up to the 35. Well, it's really more than that because you're going to get hit with Medicare. And it just goes on. So it's an opportunity to go, well, what are some of the things that, you've been charitable, or, hey, we're at the point where we have so much money that we need to think about, what do we want to do? And most clients, what they don't want to do is pay a lot more in taxes. Yeah. And they really get kind of, get bent out of shade about the Medicare the Part B premiums and such. So it's a trickle down effect. So again, that's part of the planning process. This is sitting down, making sure we're going through the tax return, knowing really what their expenses are and those types of things. And then the donor advised, same thing. A lot of times it's going to be that they have that liquidity event. Others I've seen is, they were gifted low basis stock and it's really ballooned. And now they're going, maybe they need some money, but they want to offset some of the gain with doing something charitable.
Yeah, it's a good one too.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, Rose, thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Live Greater View. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or Spotify and recommend our podcast to family and friends. To learn more about VLP Financial Advisors, please check out our website at vlpfa.com. Thanks again.
And now for our necessary disclosures. Securities and advisor services offered through Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC, member FINRA SIPC, a broker-dealer and registered investment advisor. All investing involves risk, including the possible loss of principal. There is no assurance that any investment strategy will be successful. The views stated in this podcast are not necessarily the opinion of Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC, and should not be construed directly or indirectly as an offer to buy or sell any securities mentioned. Due to the volatility with the markets mentioned, opinions are subject to change without notice. Information is based on sources believed to be reliable. However, their accuracy or completeness cannot be guaranteed. Past performance does not guarantee future results.